Affidavits and Mananasitus, Imina 35 ng Legislature in Guam is back from recess. Ladies and gentlemen, when we last left, Senator Regine Bisco Lee did have a inquiry, and I will go ahead and give it back to Senator Perez. Senator Perez, you are recognized on the amendment, on your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to withdraw my original amendment, and I have an alternate amendment to offer.
On that motion to withdraw, without any objections, hearing none, motion carries. Senator Perez, you're still recognized on another.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to offer an amendment. It's line 18, page 2. It reads, the Department of Corrections shall establish policy and procedures for the administration of this section 90.41. Such policy and procedures shall be transmitted to Legislature prior to the operation of the commissary. So this amendment allows for more transparency and perhaps some modifications as needed.
On that amendment, are there anyone wishing to speak? Is there an objection to this? Is there an objection to this? Senator Jim Moylan, on the Sabina Perez amendment, page 2, line 18.
No objection, Madam Speaker. Just like to speak on the amendment, please.
Yes, please proceed, Senator Moylan. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. This brings back some memories, and I'm glad this amendment was made by the author. When I used to work at corrections during that time, I wasn't able to shop at the commissary, but I did observe inmates that did. I recall that this will be very helpful. During that time, I believe that commissary was just on a trial mode. There was no rules and regulations about it, but the procedures are important, and that the legislature is able to review the SOP before then is, I think, quite important. If I recall, I think there were some questions about the items that are being sold, and I'm hoping in the standard procedures we'll be able to identify that as well. Tobacco is one issue, and maybe in that SOP we can also address that too. There's also inmates that used to work at the commissary too that was questioned about funding, so I'm hoping that within that SOP we'll be able to address that as well. And more importantly, the amount of payments that the inmates can keep in their fund, that is to be monitored. That there'll be no cash basis, but somehow electronic or a debit card or something. Because the difficulty is with the commissary operations is the pressure that different inmates will feel from others to be forced to buy some items. And if you got too much in your cash box, they want to rob your bank. So from tobacco to, hopefully nobody offers to sell CBD at that commissary too. So let's hope that's not there too. So I stand and rise in support of the amendment, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Anyone else on the Sabina Perez amendment? If not, are there any objections? No objections? Motion carries. Senator Perez, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I have a second amendment. It's on line 19, page 2. It reads, the Department of Corrections shall establish rules and regulations for the administration of section 90.41 prior to the operation of the commissary. And so this basically distinguishes the previous amendment, which is basically about standard operating procedures. This one is more encompassing with a rules and regs. And as you know, when in any kind of, with this bill, it proposes a fund, and I think there's a lot of concerns and issues related to the commissary in the Department of Corrections. So there's considerations of safety, considerations of money handling, and then considerations of just the general operations. I think is something that needs to be vetted, and it can either go through that AAA process or it can go through a legislative process, which is more expedited. So this kind of keeps it open. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this amendment? Senator Pito?
Madam Speaker, thank you very much and good morning. I just would like to object to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. There has been an objection. Anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Parrish, you can close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reason why I propose this amendment is because I think, we've seen many examples in government where we have funds that have been abused. And, recently we were able to, pass the rules and regulations for the revolving recycling fund, which took many, many years. And, it was fraught with some issues and had an audit even showing the misuse of funds. But I think, it goes beyond, making sure that we're accountable with funds, but I think it's also about just establishing good governance. If we are creating something new, I feel that, we need to at least have some thought and some space to develop these rules and regs. It's about starting off on the right foot. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Parrish. There's been an objection. All those in favor of Sabina Parrish's objection signify by raising your hand. Put your hand down. No, Senator. There has been an objection. Senator Parrish has closed on that. Senator Pito Terlahi objected. He can't speak. Senator Pito, do you have a point of information?
I do have, Madam Chair.
Madam Speaker.
I would like to withdraw my my objection to that because I was just looking through the original bill, and what our senator did was just move that down further down from the original bill.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. On the Senator Parrish amendment which is on page 2, line 19, there was a withdrawal of the objection. Are there any objections right now? Hearing none. Motion carries. Senator Parrish, I'll still give you the floor. Do you have any more amendments?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Speaker.
The next amendment is on line 4, page 3. It's to add a new subsection C to the bill to read, the Director of Department of Administration shall furnish an itemized quarterly report to E. Magahagan Guahan and E. Legislature Guahan of the condition and a detailed description of financial activity within the the CCF, which stands for the Corrections Commissary Fund. The Director of the Department of Administration shall further create an itemized annual report to be submitted to Magahagan Guahan and E. Legislature Guahan. So the point of this is that, this is a new undertaking. You could say it's new. So this is the purpose of this.
Yeah. Yes, Senator Parrish, if I may, just because I want to make sure, if you can just do a motion to allow legal to correct and make any technical changes on the amendment if it passes.
Surely, Madam Speaker. So I would like to make the motion for legal to review this amendment and make any technical corrections as needed.
Yeah. On that amendment to the amendment, if there are no objections, Senator Mary Turish, you are recognized.
Madam Chair, I object to this amendment. I think that, we're talking about a project that...
Senator Torres, I do apologize. Just first, on the motion for legal technical support, are there any objections? Hearing none, Motion carries. On the amendment from Senator Paris as amended, Senator Torres, please.
On the amendment, I object to the amendment, Madam Chair, and I think that we're talking about a project that's a small project that is going to service a population of about 300, of which most are indigent anyways, and so I think we're talking about very small potatoes operation here, and to have to require Department of Administration with all the things that they're entrusted to do to create an itemized annual report and to follow it so diligently, I think is nitpicking beyond good sense, so I object to this.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Yeah, it's from a, not an annual, it's a quarterly report, just to note for the record. Senator, Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I rise to offer an amendment to the amendment. Instead of it to be an itemized quarterly report, to be given a yearly report, an annual report.
Okay, on the amendment to the amendment from quarterly to annually, an annual, itemized annual report, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Anybody else on the Paris amendment as amended? There's still an objection. Anyone else? There has been an objection. Senator Torres, there has been an objection to the amended version of Senator Paris's main amendment. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Paris, you can close.
Yes, so I thank my colleague who recommended that it be an annual report. I feel that that would be sufficient to create enough transparency with this. So I think also it was recommended that there should, it wasn't just from my colleagues, but others, constituents that have actually felt that it was necessary to provide some transparency into how the money handling.
Thank you, Senator Paris. There has been an objection. All those in favor of the Senator Paris amendment signify by raising your hand. Are you going to raise? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion fails. Senator Paris, I think you've got still a couple of minutes. Do you have anything else?
Madam Speaker, I would like to request a short recess.
Okay, before I do that, does anybody else wish to speak on the main motion? We're going to go ahead and continue in the interest of time. Senator Paris, I'll ask you to work closely with legal on your additional information needed. I'll recognize Senator Paris on the main motion. Senator Bisco-Lee. I do apologize.
Suzuki Smasi, Madam Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 182-35 mainly because it really helps to address a critical policy gap that risks and arguably makes it easier to smuggle contraband into our Manila prison. Anyone who has paid attention to the Corrections Department knows that it battles a persistent barrage of drugs, phones, and even improper food items, all looking to be illegally brought into what should be a secured facility. Madam Speaker, one way people have tried and succeeded in this mission is to use food items and toiletries as a decoy for what's really being exchanged. Not instant ramen, but meth. Not deodorant, but needles. The opening of a commissary will restrict the items allowed to be brought into the prison facility and will therefore limit the opportunities and the success rates of this type of smuggling. I also want the public to know that DOC has committed itself to effective accounting practices, which will be integral to prove that this solution is working. And I also want to note that in the bill, it calls for an annual audit by the Office of Public Accountability, as well as several other checks in this regard. Madam Speaker, beyond the necessary goal of keeping drugs and other contraband out of prison, this measure can also lead to additional revenue, much needed revenue, for the underfunded Corrections Department. And it would help to enhance inmate morale and welfare, as well as, thanks to an amendment, additional rehabilitation programs for a DOC. And for these reasons, Madam Speaker, again, I rise in support of Bill 182. I thank the author and the co-sponsors, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Sidus Masi.
Buen provecho, Senator Bisco Lee. Senator Castro, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I underscore some of the sentiments raised by the prior speaker. I too rise in support of Bill 182 as amended. First, I think it was articulated pretty well at the public hearing that establishing this commissary would alleviate pressure upon operations. I think it was also stated at the public hearing that specifically limited personnel now could be used in more critical areas, and I think the example given also was perhaps to patrol or monitor the perimeter. So from an operations standpoint, this may also help speed up the lines and alleviate manpower burden upon, as was mentioned again by the author, and at the public hearing, pressures upon the visiting processing center. I'd also like to note for the record that there's several internal controls that I see are sufficient, that are the basis for my continued support and advocacy of this. I think it builds upon the successes of a prior commissary program, an inmate commissary program, this time with certain provisions for additional transparency. We can see by the examples illustrated in my previous communication with the prime author that we can anticipate the RFP having provisions for a point-of-sale system as an example for which designated authorities within the corrections facility may have access to in order to monitor the receipt and distribution of funds or the transactions or the types of inventory that's maintained at the facility. As my colleague also highlighted, it's important to see that this bill also allows for an annual audit by the public auditor. Another provision in the bill is that there's a separate corrections commissary fund, of which a portion of the proceeds will not only be used to enhance inmate morale and welfare, but there's additional value that's been added to the bill by one of our colleagues that we supported, which is for an in-house rehabilitation program. I want to close, Madam Speaker, by thanking the prime author, Senator Pido Terlahi, and his staff, and yourself, Madam Speaker, for co-authoring the measure and giving me the privilege to provide additional input and to introduce a measure that would improve upon the successes of the past of a DOC inmate commissary. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator Castro. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Perez?
Madam Speaker, a point of inquiry. So I wasn't complete with my amendments, so...
I understand that,
Okay.
Senator Perez. That's why I'm addressing you right now.
Okay.
If you want to take a moment's recess to make sure that legal, that you're working on your other amendment?
Yes.
Yeah, so on the main,
I would
so
like
we're
to
still on the
make
main
a motion.
amendment. I just wanted to move the time. On the main amendment, are there anyone else wishing to speak? If not, we're going to take a moment's recess so that Senator Perez can finish off her other amendments. No. Imina 35 na legislature in Guahan is back from recess. We are now back at the main motion. I will allow Senator Parrish, she has an additional amendment, to proffer her amendment. Senator Parrish, you are recognized at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I would like to offer amendment. It reads, it's on line 8, page 1. It's to amend 9 GCA section 90.41. It reads, first seeking legislative approval, provided that the DOC shall not be authorized to make, negotiate, or enter into a commercial lease, commercial sublease, exchange, or otherwise transfer, or issue a permit or license for the use of its real property or other related facilities for a term in excess of 5 years, inclusive of any extension, option, or renewal without prior approval of a legislatura by duly enacted legislation. So, did everybody receive this amendment?
Does everybody have a copy? Okay, Senator Parrish, you can continue.
Okay, so the rationale behind this amendment was to avoid a Y2K situation in which we were, the government was tied to a lease and with continuing renewals without having the option of actually terminating it. So what this would allow, it would allow the DOC to enter into a lease for 5 years, but it would have to be then approved by the legislature after the end of the 5 years.
Thank you, Senator Parrish. Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized on the amendment, and then Senator Biscoli.
This is just Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the amendment, it says to amend 9 GCA subsection 90.41 to read, provided that DLC shall not be authorized. So it seems like we're amending the statute itself, and then we're inserting DOC as shall not be authorized. So I think that needs to be cleared up, because if we're amending the statute in the books, we should not be singling out an agency. I don't know, that's...
Senator, if you may, Vice Speaker, you could say to amend 9 GCA section 90.41 of the bill.
That works, Madam Speaker.
So if you can make that amendment, Vice Speaker. So to amend 9 GCA 9.41.
I will request that legal
Or-
counsel, I
yes.
would like to make a motion that legal counsel rectifies this in accordance to its
Technical changes.
pertinence to the bill and not to the statute itself. Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Speaker.
On that motion, if there are no objections, motion carries. On Senator Parrish's amendment, thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Senator Terlahi, you are recognized. On the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I object to this amendment, Madam Speaker, because this particular amendment would just draw the whole thing out and not allow the commissary to even start. So I object to this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. Senator Regine Biscoli, you are recognized. Now, anyone else? Senator Therese, you are recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment. It's actually an excellent amendment. What it does is, what the bill does is it allows DOC to bypass current statute that limits lease of government property without legislative approval. So what it's doing is giving legislative approval indefinitely. That's what the bill's doing. And what this amendment does is, again, limits that legislative approval to 5 years, which I'm glad she caught that. It's the draft RFP that I've looked at calls for a term of 3 years with a possible option to renew for 2 more additional years, which would make it 5-year lease. But I agree with a limit of 5 years. I think this is what would be consistent with all the other government leases. At current time, there's a maximum of 5 years. I personally would suggest the DOC to keep your lease low for the first year, make sure that you've worked out all the kinks so that we don't have any issues that we can't get out of this contract, and that to make sure that they include every safety precaution or allow themselves to get out of it and then fix that lease for the next term. Si Diyos masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. Anyone else on the Perez amendment? If not, Senator Perez, would you like to close or ask for the vote? There has been an objection, colleagues. All those in favor of Senator Perez's amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are back on the main motion. Anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? Senator Perez?
Yes, I have another amendment to proffer.
Okay, I apologize, Senator Perez. I did not see that. Please proceed.
It's lines 1 to 3 on page 2. So it reads B. In accordance with Title V, Chapter 5, Guam Code Annotated, Guam Procurement Law, the Department of Corrections is authorized to enter into a contract for the lease of up to 300 square feet of its property for an inmate commissary. Procurement of said contract shall be done by DOC staff who is qualified under Section 5141 of Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated. So the purpose of this amendment is to make it explicit that this particular solicitation has to follow Guam procurement law. And in addition to that, it ensures that those that are participating in the solicitation have the qualifications to do so. And I think this is also critical because in a recent audit by OPA, many of the agencies lack these personnel. So again, it's about setting things on the right foot, making sure that what we procure is being done by qualified staff, and we're following procurement law. Satuus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone wishing to speak? Are there any objections? Is there an objection? If not, motion carries. Colleagues, we are on the main motion. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Pito Terlahi, you can close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In closing, I want to thank all my colleague here to thank them for supporting this particular bill. And hopefully we can just go ahead and open up the commissary and do the right thing for the Department of Correction. Thank you.
Senator Terlahi, could you please move it to the third reading voting file?
And I move
180.
182-35 COR to the
Voting
third
file.
reading file.
On that motion to move 182-35 COR to the third reading voting file without any objection, motion carries. Senator Pito Terlahi, I will also recognize you on bill number 183-35 COR.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill number 183-35 COR, introduced by myself, Tina Rose Munya Barnes, William N. Castro, and I would like bill number 183-35 COR to be moved to the third reading file. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an act to add a new...
Senator, go ahead. If you need to move it, you need to please move it to the third reading voting file.
I thought I mentioned that.
And to discuss.
And to discuss. Bill number 183
Okay. Yeah.
dash COR is an act to add a new Article 6 to Chapter 90 of Title 9 GCA relative to the creation of a civilian correctional reserve program at the Department of Correction. Let me just outline some of the reasons of why we initiated this bill and the advantage of initiating this bill. Number one, BBMR fiscal note estimates that 10 correctional reservists would only cost $60,000 a year, a bargain of 10 new bodies at DOC, which DOC critically needs. Number 2, our reserve program offers reservists an opportunity to gain contacts and give employers the ability to try out potential recruits and directly observe their work ethics, dependability, fit for the job. Number 3, a correction reserve unit will supplement full-time correction officers when full-time officers are on leave due to sickness, vacation, and military leave, and other things that they are required to do during their daily activities, and they can be activated during man-made or natural disaster even. Number 4, with certification, reservists can perform transportation duties, hospital duties, and other assignment freeing correctional officers for more critical roles. Number 5, reservists also form a pool of recruits for future correction officers classes. And number 6, other public safety agencies have reservist program which augment existing manpower to positive effect of the dollar amount used. And let me just add, Madam Speaker, that I would trustfully say that the recruitment of these reservists for the Department of Correction is within the budget. And thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Si Jesus Masi, Senator Pito Terlahi. Anyone else on the main motion? Anyone else? If not, Senator Terlahi, I will recognize you on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess I have a couple questions if the author would yield. I'm trying to figure out how this reserve program is going to fit at, I mean, I know that the Major Ugun from DOC says that they would call them in on an as-needed basis, that sometimes people who might want to serve in law enforcement only want to do so on a part-time basis, but I guess I want to know how this fits in versus the promises or the insistence that we hire more personnel at the Department of Corrections. I would think that even with whatever we have budgeted in the FY20 budget for hiring, that they would still need more, and that this should go towards that instead of a potential reserve force, potential part-time. Let's just put them in there full-time. I guess I'm just trying to figure that part out. If the author would yield, as to would it be more beneficial to just put this money towards full-time officers at Department of Corrections?
Senator Terlahi, would you like to answer Senator Therese Terlahi's question?
Like I said, Madam Speaker, the budget does cover this type of program. And the additional officers that we're asking for here is the shortage that they have right now, and this is just to augment the numbers of officers, because I mentioned some numbers like 10 officers that will be hired, and the main purpose of this particular bill, Madam Speaker, is just to augment the shortage of correctional officers at the Department of Correction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Pito Terlahi. Senator Therese, will that suffice? You still have the floor.
Thank you. So I guess by the fiscal note, they're intending to use $60,000 for this reserve program, and maybe that's not going to be enough to hire actually a full-time person on. But if this is going to help them to get perhaps retirees in, I appreciate that. I worry a little bit about bringing in brand new post-certified officers into the Department of Corrections, because I feel like that's one of the more dangerous posts to be placed at. And I know that we have this reserve law enforcement in many different, in the Guam Police Department has a reserve, the marshals over at the court have a reserve. I think there are others if I remember correctly, but I don't know. It seems to me that we can't do it in this bill, but, you know, at a certain point, just like we did with Post, where we made sure that all of our law enforcement officers were trained in the same way so that they could function when we needed them in the same capacity, that we put these reserve officers together and we say, you know, we need you all here at this point, or we need you all there at this point. And for example, when we were really suffering up at the Department of Corrections and we needed to move police officers, I don't know, if we had a combined reserve program and that could help out at that precinct instead of closing it down. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just saying, I support the program for reserve officers, especially if it's going to bring in the more experienced retirees who want to work part-time. And I trust that DOC is going to be able to manage this appropriately. But I just didn't want to be taking away from what could be done on a full-time basis, because they continue to say that that even with the additional officers that we've budgeted for, they still need more. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Therese. Anybody else on the main motion? Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. I thank the sponsor, the author, for providing this bill for the Department of Corrections. We've held a series of oversight hearings for the Department of Corrections to see what the challenges are, where the challenges are at, and to understand what they need. And one of the most, the priority that they set before us was the lack of personnel. And so I'd like to thank the good sponsor for addressing the lack of personnel in a very creative manner and creating a volunteer force. I also appreciate that we are sticking to the standard. We're still going through the post certification process, and so I hope that this will be another step forward for the Department of Corrections to get the assistance that they so greatly deserve and need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Vice Speaker Nelson. Anyone else on the main motion? Senator Mary Torres, you are recognized.
I just want to also express my support for this bill. And a lot of times it is this type of reserve program that enables the departments to exercise flexibility when there is a need. And I think that it was well thought through. There's some areas that I wasn't so sure about, but have come to understand. So I just want to commend the author for this. I think that it's a good step towards at least an option, which is what we always look forward to when we're shorthanded and don't have the manpower.
Si Zeus Masi, Senator Mary Torres, any... I do apologize. Anyone else on the main motion? Senator Luis Muñoz, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If the author will yield to a question.
Please go ahead and state your question, Senator Muñoz.
So, Madam Speaker, a few years ago, the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve Program had some problems, and most notably, the training and certification requirements were either short-cutted or waived, leaving GPD with some inadequate trained reservists. The law was changed to require the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve to meet the same requirements to full-time GPD officers. Now, the bill requires the corrections reservists meet only initial training requirements. I would like to ask the author if it would be a problem if we just strike the word initial on line 18, page 3, so that the reservists have to meet all the training requirements of correction officer recruits.
Thank you, Senator Muñoz. Senator Pito, would you like to
Thank you,
yield?
Madam Speaker. All this, those that are coming into the Department of Correction for the police reservists are probably individuals that are post-certified. So the initial program that they're going to do, I'm not sure what they're talking about. But what I'm saying here is most of the recruitment for these reservists would probably have qualified under the post-certification. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Pito. Senator Munya, on the requirements, they must meet the,
So I'm just assuming then that the word initial is just kind of just there because their requirements will already be full requirements, right? I mean, I guess that's what I'm wondering. What is initial requirements as opposed to just being required like post-certified?
the initial requirements as done by post.
By post,
Yes.
that's the initial, okay. I was just wondering what the initial meant. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.
Senator Joseph Augustine on the main motion.
I think Madam Speaker, in reference to the word an initial, it's like what the military does if you change branches, is to indoctrinate you into what the branch is about. On all initial trainings of every branch in law enforcement, it's not about the post, it's about what you're getting into. Like if you're going to go into DOC, they're going to tell you about DOC, tell you basically, give you the initial shock of what you've just applied for. It's nothing else. Once you get past the initial, then it's full blown. Then it becomes everything that every law enforcement officer needs to learn. That's my understanding of what the word initial training is about. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine, for that further clarification. Senator Munya, are you okay? Yes. Thank you, Senator Munya. On the main motion, anyone else wishing to speak? Senator, Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I rise in support of the bill. I think in the last couple of oversight hearings of the Department of Corrections, we heard how being short-staffed was a very, very concerning issue for the safety of both our corrections officers and our inmates at the Department of Correction. And so I think this bill is a step in the right direction to help us at least begin addressing the problem. And I thank the good author for introducing this. Sijus Masi.
Buen provecho, Senator Shelton. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Pito, would you like to close and move it?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to make a motion to pass this motion to pass it on file, and maybe we can discuss and invigorate more. But if anything, maybe let me just close, Madam Speaker. I move that Bill 182-35 be placed on the third reading file. And I want to thank all my colleagues for supporting this bill. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Yeah. That will be bill number 183-COR to the third reading file for a voting file. Are there any? Senator?
Correction 183.
Thank you,
That's
Senator
35
Pito.
CR.
Yes. So Bill 183-35 COR to the voting file, third reading. No objection. Motion carries. We are now on Bill number 196-35 LS. Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized. (196-35).
Sijus Masi, Madam Speaker. Towards the last minute, we had a discussion with GPA, and the superintendent at this time was off island. And so I'd like to pass this bill on file. We are scheduling a roundtable hearing next week So we're trying to get everyone together and ensure that we are moving in the right direction with this solar power bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Truly appreciate it, Vice Speaker, for the updated information on this bill, 196-35. So a motion to pass on file. Before I do that, I was asked for a 2-minute recess. I will have a moment's recess. Imina 35 na legislature in Guahan is back from recess. There was a motion to set aside Bill 196-35 LS. Are there any objections? Hearing none. Motion passes. We are now on Bill number 200-35 COR. I will recognize the author, Senator Regine Bisco-Lee. You are recognized at this time.
Sidus Maasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that Bill 200-35 be placed into the third reading file and have an opportunity to discuss it.
You may proceed, but if you can, just for the record, recite the title and where it's, what committee, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. That's Bill 200-35 COR as amended by the Committee on Federal and Foreign Affairs, Telecommunications, Technology, and Labor. It's an act to amend subsection 9107B, 9109C, 20, 9110A and E, and 9115M to add a new subsection D to subsection 9108 and add a new subsection 9146, all of Chapter 9, Title 12, Guam Code Annotated, relative to updating Guam's 30-year-old rates for workers' compensation and authorizing alternative medical facilities for injured employees.
Senator Lee, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 200-35 is critical for the employees of Guam.
Senator Regine Bisco-Lee, I do apologize. I am just informed by the clerk that there's another version that's on the floor right now.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'd like the opportunity to discuss this, and then I will bring up the reasoning behind why I would like to submit a substitute version. So if you just allow me to continue, I appreciate it.
I will do, Senator Lee, and please proceed.
Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, Bill 200-35 is critical for the employees of Guam. Unfortunately, our workers' compensation law has not been updated in the 30 years since it was established. This means that the safety net meant to help construction workers, nurses, firefighters, and other employees injured on the job hasn't been fair for years. This legislation proposes across-the-board increases based on inflation, and that essentially means what the bill provides are the original 1989 rates translated into 2020 dollars. I believe this makes this adjustment fair for both the employee needing the lifeline and the employer who provides this benefit. What constitutes fair should not be determined by one person alone, though. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to express my utmost gratitude to all the stakeholders who helped shape this bill over the course of several years for their good faith engagement and well-intended suggestions. They really gave me the confidence to report to our colleagues that the version of Bill 200-35 before us today is pragmatic, it is workable, and it is as fair as possible to every business and every employee involved in workers' compensation claims. Improvements to this measure have been made since Bill 200's introduction and public hearing. For the benefit of the body and the public, major changes include: 1, basing the minimum weekly compensation for disability to 66 2/3% of the prevailing minimum wage. This amendment was made to reflect a recommendation from the Insurance Association of Guam that the minimum compensation be 66.75% of the prevailing minimum wage. This new flexible target will help us ensure that the rate does not create any malingering issues for any injured worker, that they would not be paid more to stay at home rather than return to work, and that rates should be adjusted automatically with any increase in the minimum wage, preventing the possibility of another update taking decades to enact. The version of Bill 200 reported out by committee also calls for all other minimum and maximum compensation amounts to reflect any percentum increases in the prevailing minimum wage. In recognition of a good idea, that is to establish automatic adjustments to ensure regular updates, this is a fair way to afford equal adjustments across the law and not just for one portion of workers' compensation payouts. Madam Speaker, it's taken 30 years to adjust the current rates. By building in a provision to automatically adjust these rates under the workers' compensation law, we are showing a commitment to our families that this will no longer be a once-in-a-generation exercise. Per centum adjustments based on increases in the minimum wage will also show a commitment to the business community that any compensation rate adjustments will be incremental rather than infrequent and large increases like the one we need to pass today. Language was also added to the bill that will now authorize more than just the Guam Memorial Hospital emergency room to see government employees who want to file a claim with the Workers' Compensation Commission. The Department of Labor suggested this change to help alleviate the burden of the already busy GMH ER. Not all workplace injuries are life-threatening, but today, even a secretary who sprained her ankle on a wet floor will need to go to the ER if they want a valid claim. The new provision now authorizes GMH's urgent care facility and any private hospital's ER or urgent care facility to see GovGuam employees. These expanded yet still limited options lessens the pressure of GMH's ER as intended, while also preventing a risk of doctor shopping for a fraudulent compensation claim. Finally, a compromise effective date of 120 days after the enactment of this law was added. This is because all workers' compensation policy issues prior to the passage of Bill 200-35 would have been issued with pre-Bill 200 rates, anticipating pre-Bill 200 benefits. The amendment to this effective date of the bill provides the industry time to conduct accurate actuarial analysis. It also accounts for the time needed for the insurance commissioner to deliberate and act on any rate adjustments proposed as a result of the enactment of this new law and its new compensation amounts. And Madam Speaker, at this time, I would like to substitute Bill 200 to correct a minor error that misapplied the 2/3 of the minimum wage rate to maximum weekly compensation for disability.
On that motion to accept, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Lee, you still have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, Sudos Masi, and I thank my colleagues for approving that technical fix to the bill. I would like at this time to proffer several amendments for our further discussion. Some of these changes were made in committee, Madam Speaker, but other of the changes that were discussed in the bill's public hearing, I felt it was important to leave it up to the body for us to decide as a whole how we should proceed. And so again, I thank my colleagues for their time and attention. My first amendment proposes that provisions under subsection 9107B of Chapter 922 GCA be bifurcated, with the maximum weekly compensation rate for disability as a new item 1 and the minimum as a new item 2.
Senator, I do apologize. I have none of those amendments with us right now. It's passing.
I believe they're being passed out right now, Madam Speaker, so if I'd be allowed to continue.
Yeah, and then just for the record, just one more technical change. So on the motion to speak on the bill number 200-35 CR as substituted on the floor, you can proceed right now.
Sudos Masi. So colleagues, just for your information, this will be amendment, the first amendment to page 2 and 4, lines 25 through 26, and line 10 on page 4, just so you're able to follow along.
So please proceed with the first one.
Thank you. My first amendment proposes that provisions under subsection 9107B of Chapter 9, 22 GCA be bifurcated, with the maximum weekly compensation rate for disability as a new item 1 and the minimum as an item 2. This allows for the maximum to be added to the list of rates automatically adjusted under Section 6 of the bill, and the minimum to remain tied to 66 2/3% of the minimum wage. So the amendment would read, Section 2, subsection 9107B of Chapter 9, Title 2, Guam Code Annotated is hereby amended to read B1. Compensation for disability shall not exceed $520 per week. And then 2, if the employee's average weekly rates as computed under subsection 9111 are less than the amount equivalent to 66 2/3 per centum of the prevailing minimum wage per week, he or she shall receive as compensation for permanent total disability not less than the amount equivalent to 66 2/3 per centum of the prevailing minimum wage per week. And then section 6 refers to the automatic adjustments to the rates, and it includes subsection 9107B1.
So on the first amendment, section 2, are there any objections? Anyone wishing to speak on it, Senator? Anyone else? I'm going to go ahead and ask Senator Joe San Augustine. I do know a couple of our other colleagues want to speak on this amendment, but I will allow Senator San Augustine at this time. Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, I'm in support of the bill. I just want to ask the author, I'm trying to follow the amendments, and I'm already seeing it on your substitute bill, so I'm just trying to stay focused on it, and I see it. I'm reading along as you're reading it, and it's already on your substitute bill. So maybe you can just clarify.
Yes, that's
All right, thank you.
Senator Lee, would you like to yield?
Yes, absolutely, Madam Speaker. Again, just for clarification, what this amendment is attempting to do is just bifurcate it. The retiring speaker is correct. This language already exists in the bill. I'm just attempting to separate it for the purposes of making further changes to it in subsequent amendments. So this is just separating them
Yes.
so that we can address them separate as opposed to one large piece.
Thank you, Senator Lee. And Senator San Augustine, you're okay with that? Thank you very much. So on this amendment, are there any objections? Anyone else wishing to speak? So Senator Lee, again, the clerk has wanted me to verify, and based on the request, I was going to allow to fabricate this amendment into two sections. First, section 2, and then section 6. So we are working on section 2 first. Okay? Are there anyone wishing to speak on that amendment? If not, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. Section 6 now, Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. So section 6 would read, a new subsection 9146 is hereby added to Chapter 9, Title 22, Guam Code Annotated to read, rates and amounts mentioned in subsection 9107B1, 9109C20, 9110A, 9110E, and 9115M of this chapter shall automatically adjust to amounts equivalent to the percentage change in any increase with minimum wage. And again, colleagues, I just want to reiterate that this will allow for this change to be made now so that with each subsequent change to the minimum wage, we won't have to come back and make changes to workers' comp every single time. This will help us to move forward with the changing times and hopefully move forward with inflation as things change.
Sitos Masi, Senator Biscoli. Anyone else on the Section 6 amendment? Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Biscoli, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So my final amendment would be to adjust the maximum weekly compensation for disability from $520 as found in the bill currently to $1,011. This new ceiling was first suggested to us by the Guam Federation of Teachers, but after speaking with more stakeholders on the prevailing wages for doctors, masters in construction trades, and other high-paying occupations that are associated with workplace injuries, I agree that adjusting this particular rate beyond inflation and to align it better with stateside amounts is a justified move. However, I offer this as a separate amendment in deference to my colleagues and as a way to come to a consensus on what the right amount for a maximum weekly rate should be. So the amendment would change Section 2 to the bill, subsection 9107B, to read, compensation for disability shall not exceed $1,011 per week, provided that if the employee's average weekly rates as computed under subsection 9111 are less than the amount equivalent to 66 2/3 per centum of the prevailing minimum wage per week, he or she shall receive as compensation for permanent total disability not less than the amount equivalent to 66 2/3 per centum of the prevailing minimum wage per week. So again, Madam Speaker, we're changing the compensation for disability from $520 to $1,011 per week. This measure, or this change, was discussed at length in our public hearing. It was brought forward to us again by the Guam Federation of Teachers, and I offer up this amendment to my colleagues.
Sitos Masi, Senator Biscoli. Anyone else on the amendment? Anyone wishing to speak? At this time, colleagues, I'll go ahead and recognize the Vice Speaker. Majority Leader, Vice Speaker, you are recognized.
Sitos Masi, Madam Speaker, just a point of inquiry or question for the sponsor if she would yield. Just to understand the amount equivalent to 66 2/3, if she can just explain how we arrived at that rather than the other requirements listed.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. I will ask the good senator from Tamuning if she'd like to yield to that inquiry from the Vice Speaker.
Yes, thank you very much. So this amendment was actually made to reflect a recommendation from the Insurance Association of Guam that the minimum compensation be 66.75% of the prevailing minimum wage. So this is something that was in our law originally, and so we're trying to carry it forward, but also this flexible target will help to ensure that the rate doesn't create any malingering issues. So if, for example, the minimums, if, for example, the minimum was previously $150 a week, and we're raising it to 66 2/3 of the prevailing minimum wage. The concern was that there may be some in our community who are receiving minimum wage, and then if they are able to, or if they qualify for this disability, that the disability rate would be larger than what they make in a normal paycheck. And so it would, there's a concern that it might cause them to prolong their, and just a malingering issue. And so that's the reason why we tied it to 66 and 2/3.
Situs Masi, Senator Lee. Vice Speaker Nelson, does that answer? Thank you very much. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Therese Terlahi, I will recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So on the amendment that will change the maximum compensation, which is currently $250 in statute, to $1,011. Yes, I also have an inquiry, and I'm just, so the original bill that underwent a public hearing had proposed that it would be maxed out at 520 instead of 1,011. So I understand the reasoning to increase it, but I guess I just wanted to know, because the fiscal note that we received from BBMR said that even the increase to 520 would have a significant impact on workers' comp insurance for businesses, and they said the increased costs of doing business may be passed on to the general public in some form. They were not able to give us a concrete amount of what that impact would be at 520, so my inquiry is whether we have any other information after this fiscal note as to what the impact might be to businesses by mandating that, or raising the cap to 1,011 instead of 520 as was proposed originally.
Thank you. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we went, again, this bill was introduced, a similar bill was introduced last term. We worked through this with many stakeholders, with the Society for Human Resource Management, with local labor attorneys, and then also the Insurers Association of Guam. And so it's really challenging to be able to predict those rates and how those rates would increase. Hopefully, after the passage of this bill, information would go back to actuaries from off-island to be able to identify what the increases would be. Absolutely, there will be an increase, but at this time, whether it's 520 or 1,000, we're unable to say at this time.
Senator Therese, does that help? Will that suffice?
I'll move on, Madam Speaker. I guess we are choosing an amount of 1,000 versus, as recommended by the Guam Federation of Teachers, it sounds like. I'm not sure where the 520 was based on that we were originally proposing, but I am concerned that according to BBMR, and I'm not sure why they're not able to predict this, but they said that it would, because of government employee claims, it would increase the cost to the government. There would also be an impact in the private sector in the form of increased premiums as insurance companies cover the additional costs and risk. And this is doubling the original proposal, so I'm not sure what that impact is. I am concerned about it. I agree that we need to raise the workers' comp wages that are going to be covered, versus what we have in the statute. I guess I'm just trying to get some basis for these certain amounts and what the impact would be. So when we vote on this, we feel confident that we know that impact, and we are going to be responsible for that. The BBMR has also pointed out that workers' comp increases costs may increase by 150 to 200%. And now they're not clear whether that means insurance costs, right? And that's, I guess, what I want to know. So I guess if the sponsor would yield to one more question, do we have an assurance by the insurance companies that she's been working with on this, or or organization, that they support this change from 520 to 1,000 also?
Senator Terlahi, Senator Bisco Lee, would you like to yield?
Sujus Masi, so just in answer to some of the other questions that were raised, Madam Speaker.
That's the only question I raised, ma'am.
Madam Speaker, just so that to clarify for the entire body, if anybody has any other questions, the initial amount of $520 was actually an amount that we arrived to based on the increase of inflation. So we took, like, let's say a basket of goods, a consumer price index from the year in the 80s, and we took the percent increase from all of those goods to today. And that percent change was applied to all of these rates throughout the bill. So all of the increases were based on not just some number that we threw out there, but actually on hard data from research that we had done and painstaking research that we had completed. And so that's where we arrived at this amount of 520, and that's what we discussed in the public hearing. There was also the suggestion by Guam Federation of Teachers to increase it to this $1,000 rate and $1,011. And this actually puts us on par with some of the lowest amounts across the 50 states. I believe this would put us on par with, I believe, Missouri, which is, in the bottom 5 of the 50 states. So it does sound like a huge change because it has been 30 years. It has been a long time coming for us to get to this point. And so I'm just really concerned that even though we're taking a big bite of the apple today, if we fail to act, then it's just gonna be, who knows, another decade, another 20, 30 years gonna go down the line. And I'm very concerned that injured workers won't be able to get back on the job, get well, and to be able to come back and be contributing members to society. So I hope that answers the question in terms of the increases. All of the stakeholders were there at the public hearing, and so they all had an opportunity to make comments on some of these proposed suggestions or changes, and I didn't hear any objections to any of these changes at the public hearing from any of our stakeholders. Sujus Masi.
Sujus Masi, Senator Bisco Lee. Senator Talai, does that help?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't think it necessarily answers the specific question that I had asked, which is, did the stakeholders, besides GFT, who proposed changing from 500 to 1,000, testify in support of 1,000? I can't find anything like that. They, of course, it looks like they agreed with the 500, and they were able to assess the impacts of that and support that. And so I'm only just trying to get some assurance here that the other stakeholders involved are also in agreement with the 1,000, or if this is going to increase, be that tipping point that increases the cost beyond what they are going to be able to accommodate. I don't know the impact on insurance costs to them, because even BBMR is not clear as to what that is going to be, and I wish we had that information. Otherwise, of course, increasing the rates, I have no objection. Increasing the rates, the amendment that makes the increase follow the minimum wage is a good idea. I have no objection to that. It's still only this, because this is being made on the floor here, and I want some assurance that we are not raising it above what all these others who supported this bill originally are going to feel comfortable with. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Talai. Anyone else on the main? Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized.
Sujus Masi, Madam Speaker, can I just make a motion that we recess and return at 2:30? Thank you.
On that motion to recess to 2:30, no objection, motion carries.